What's going on, guys? It's RussellMuscleTV here again, back with another video on our Survivor Retrospective series. Today, we're looking at Survivor Nicaragua, and we're joined by fellow Survivor YouTuber, Snuffed. I'm so excited for this. How you doing today?
Yeah, I'm really excited to get into this, Russell. It's such a great season. I'm a big fan of Survivor Nicaragua, and I've certainly got a lot of unpopular opinions, so I'm willing to share them all today and discuss a dark season, but certainly one of my favorites.
If you are new to the channel, this is a Survivor Retrospective series. I'm kind of doing a day-by-day, daily series here on YouTube leading up to the premiere of Survivor Season 41. A long time ago, I started with Season 1, and every single day afterwards, we've been looking at a different single season leading up till Season 41. So excited for that. Coming off of Survivor Heroes versus Villains, I think that's the big problem of why the season might be a Dark Ages season and kind of builds off and starts that whole Dark Ages thing, is because you have Heroes versus Villains, the big conclusion there, and then we got Nicaragua. Tell me about that. Do you think Heroes versus Villains and ending that way is the reason this season kind of gets seen in a darker light?
Yeah, I think it definitely comes down to expectations. I mean, leading into Nicaragua, you had 3 great seasons: Tocantins, Samoa, and then Heroes versus Villains. So certainly it was a drop-off in quality. It was starting a new era, trying to play around with more new twists, which made it a little bit uglier. Also very reliant on recruits as well, which is certainly drop people's expectations, but certainly coming off the back of Heroes vs. Villains, which is widely considered to be the greatest season of all time, given how many legends came back, 20 iconic players with the likes of Sandra and Sari. Compare that to this cast with people like Eve, Tyrone, and Wendy Jo. It certainly doesn't have the same level of characters.
Hey, don't forget Jimmy T there on that list. Yeah, exactly. The list of characters here, I think, is a big part of it, the recruits, and the whole idea of the Dark Ages of Survivor kind of scares people away looking back at it now. Obviously, the Dark Ages of Survivor being from season 21 to season 26, that's kind of what I consider it to be. And you got a lot of rough seasons here, and this is kind of where it all begins. The season starts off, and we get the old versus young dynamic. I don't like this dynamic, because it makes the challenges a little tougher to do. And they change it up a little bit here and not being as physical, which kind of becomes a trend later on, obviously, with more puzzles. But they get kind of creative here with these challenges, and it becomes kind of weird to watch. Some of the challenges are hit and miss throughout the entire season. Do you like this opening of the old versus young division?
Yeah, I think as a theme, I'm kind of a fan of it. We saw it work out in Millennials versus Gen X, so we've certainly seen that there is that ability for an old versus young season to work. But I think in this instance, yeah, the challenges were very wacky. And I think when you look at the old tribe, a lot of them are really, really old. They're in their 60s because you got the likes of Jimmy Johnson, who I think was 66 at the time. Yeah. Jane Bright was in her late 50s. Dan Lembo was really old. And you compare that with, Brenda, Nyanka, Kelly Shin, Fabio, Chase, these really, really young athletic people. Compare that to the older guys, and it's, a massive discrepancy there.
Yeah, exactly. And the main kind of issue I have, the old versus young thing, it's been proven to work many times over, but it's just kind of like the clunky and weird aspects that we get with the Medallion of Power and that kind of thing put into Survivor. The huge twist of the Medallion of Power lasts so long that it gets all the way into 4 episodes of the season before we trash that after the swap. So obviously, guys, the Medallion of Power, being that the tribe that controls it can choose to use the Medallion of Power and they get the advantage in one of the challenges. And then after, if they win or lose the challenge, it does not matter. The Medallion of Power gets shifted over to the other tribe. It kind of ends up being because the young tribe knows they're going to win anyway. They don't want to give the older tribe an advantage later on. So they're just going to hold it until we swap on day 11 or day 12, whatever. How do you like this Medallion of Power? Obviously, I think it's a big miss. What about you?
Yeah, definitely a big miss. I understand where they were going with it, obviously. I mean, the discrepancy, as I mentioned, with the tribes, the age discrepancy was so vast that they sort of did need a twist to level the playing field. But overall, the Medallion of Power wasn't really used for much. The advantages were so slim. Oftentimes it was just you have to throw one less beanbag or something tiny like that. So it didn't make too big of a difference. And I think it just overcomplicated the game. It didn't really need to be there. And I know that Jeff Probst, in particular, in retrospect, has said that he regretted putting this twist on the season. It was worth a go, but just a huge miss.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of like the very last thing touch on before we kind of dive into a more deeper approach to the season is I kind of view this season the same way I view Guatemala almost and Gabon. I feel like most of the community does that the same way. It's a very polarizing season, and I got a little heat in my Gabon video for saying it's a weird season, and someone commented, "Oh, do you think all these seasons are weird in Survivor?" And I think all these seasons have like the same sort of vibe to them. It feels different, almost like a one-off version of Survivor, where you're going into it. If you're going into it wanting, your Kagayans, your David versus Goliath, you're not going to get that. But as its own one-off thing, these seasons can be really fun. What are your general thoughts on the season as a whole before we dive deep into it?
Yeah, that's the beauty of Survivor is you get the cast and it can be a completely different season. You could have a very game body season like Ghost Island, Cagayan, David vs. Goliath, Millennials vs. Gen X, or you could have a complete train wreck of a season like Thailand, Fiji, Nicaragua, Gabon. So that there's always that precedent that comes down to the cast. But I said at the beginning of the podcast, I'm a big fan of this season, and I think it's because of that train wreck aspect of it. It's because of the dark humor. You get some really fun moments with Nyanka and Fabio's rivalry, Dan Lembo and Holly Hoffman's rivalry, and the whole incident about the alligator shoes. There's lots of fun moments in here individually that when you add them up, if you watch it on a rewatch, the more you watch it, the more you'll learn to appreciate it. And for me, I think just getting to know this cast and admiring how inexperienced they are with the game and how out of their depth they are, but how they make it work in the end. It's really fun to see.
Yeah, exactly. You hit it right on the head there. Like, the cast is for sure so unexperienced, especially from like a Survivor aspect, like knowing the game, the strategy. I would say, you got your Brenda, Sash, and Marty for the strategic, and then other than that, it kind of falls apart there. But again, like, that's kind of the beauty of it. You're not going into the season wanting a Cagayan or whatever. On a rewatch of this season, if you're going into it knowing, okay, this is a social season, we get some humor, we have some fun moments, it's going to be a great time. Anyways, I want to dive right into it here with the kind of the pre-swap, our first 4 vote outs here. And the first thing I remember going into this pre-swap was the overwhelming amount of screen time that Jimmy Johnson gets. 66-year-old, he has no effect on the entire game, but because former NFL coach, huge personality, obviously, he has such a large following, I think Survivor really wanted to capitalize on this, even though he gets voted out on day 8.
Yeah, but Jimmy Johnson did have a massive influence on that earlier Sparta tribe. You looked at what happened with Holly Hoffman and Dan Lembo. Holly nearly wanted to quit the game, and Jimmy J was a big part in trying to convince her to stay in the game. And obviously, we look at what happened. Holly made it all the way to the end there, being voted out at the final 4. But I think Jimmy Johnson had a very calming influence on the tribe. Obviously, we did see a little bit of a leadership struggle there, which made it hard to watch at times. But he's such a big character, obviously a well-known player outside of the game, and in fact, probably the biggest celebrity to ever play the game. So there was certainly going to be a lot of focus on him, and he did provide a lot of wisdom while he was there. Certainly not as much fun as the likes of Nyanka or Fabio or Dan Lembo, but certainly he did have a very calming influence on the tribe as the leader.
Yeah, and then going right back into the next vote, what are your thoughts on Jimmy T?
Yeah, Jimmy T. I think the older version of Malcolm Freeberg, right, is the common thought. But again, a great character, and we did see that leadership struggle between him and Jimmy J. So a lot of the early Sparta tribe, obviously ignoring Wendy Joe, who was just a completely terrible player at the beginning, but a lot of the early pre-swap Sparta was basically around that power struggle between Jimmy J and Jimmy T. Obviously, you had the likes of Marty as well, who was sort of sitting a little bit further back. But it did revolve around this massive power struggle, and in the end, Jimmy T came out on top, but he only lasted 3 more days.
Yeah, exactly. I remember just the Jimmy T versus Jimmy J power struggle being a highlight of this early part of the game, especially on the Sparta tribe. But when you move over to the other tribe, the young tribe over there, they go to 1 tribal council here before the swap happens, and with that you have the Shannon vote off. You get a big power struggle here on this side of things as well. Like, both of these tribes are power struggling, fighting for that majority here. And on the young tribe, we have Shannon versus Brenda and Sash. And I remember, like, it's not a nice moment of the season. I kind of forgot it happened, actually, when I was going in for a rewatch, is Shannon gets really aggressive here at this tribal council.
Yeah, very, very aggressive. And he obviously had the likes of Fabio and Alina on his side. And I think Chase wavered a little bit there, but he was just very aggressive coming towards Sash with a lot of his comments. Very ugly to see on the show. And, you know, certainly that hasn't held up to this day. It's definitely one of the bigger flame outs at Tribal Council, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And so obviously we're glad to see Shannon go out here. And then obviously another highlight here of this pre-swap is Brenda and Nyanka end up finding the idol. And we get to learn a little bit more about Nyanka here. Obviously becoming a big factor on later in the game, especially after the quit happens, but we'll talk about that in a bit. And then we get the post-swap here. So my two main notes I have here for the post-swap is Holly becomes a cool kid, and then Marty loses his majority in the game. What do you want to touch on first?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Holly is a good one to touch on because you looked at her in the pre-swap Espada days, and she was really so close to quitting the game. She was losing her mind, and see her gain that traction and, you know, start to make relationships on this on the new Espada tribe with the likes of Benry, Nyanka, Alina, drifting towards these people who, you know, are younger in life and away from her original alliance. It was a great opportunity for her to really pivot her game and move in a different direction. And we did see that with the likes of Tyrone and Eve being picked off early on the new Espada tribe. We saw this shift towards the younger people, and Holly was a big part in gaining that power for him.
Yeah, exactly. And then on kind of the other side of things, we have Marty losing his majority in the game. And then we have this weird moment here, which still to this day, I was going back watching this moment before we had this podcast. I'm still not sure how I feel about the Marty and his idol maneuvering, as I like to call it, and ends up giving the idol to Sash and still like play the idol. Not like, how do you feel about this move?
Yeah, it is really interesting move to think about. It's hard to dissect though, because he really didn't have any other option. It was either he was going to be voted out and had to play his idol at the next tribal council, or he could try to use that idol as currency. Certainly, if I was playing the game, I would never give my idol to a member of an opposing tribe, especially if they were trying to blackmail me and say they'd vote me out if I didn't give them the idol. Because, you know, what incentive does that give me to then give them the idol and work with them in the game? It turned out for Marty in the end, but it was a really hard move for him to make because I don't think it was the best move. But then again, he had his back against the wall. Really, he didn't have anyone because that alliance of Sash and Brenda were really just dominating.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we have Marty end up doing really anything he has to stay alive in the game, and he does make it to the merge ultimately, which is kind of a good thing. Marty is one of the bigger presidents of the season, and we can touch on that a little later, but I feel like Marty is a player on this season that should have come back for returning player season. Ends up not. He misses I feel like the boat's kind of sunk there though. He's not going to be coming back now, but during the time, especially during this dark ages, Marty's a player that I definitely could have seen come back, and I'm not sure why Survivor chose not to.
Yeah, and Marty is definitely the bigger character on this season. The only returnee we've had from this season is Brenda. Now, I'd certainly say Marty, I would have loved to see him come back. Again, as you say, I think the ship has sailed on that end. Holly Hoffman as well, someone I would have loved to see come back. But again, I think the ship has sailed. Alina and Benry as well, I'd even consider as players I'd like to see return. But, you know, overall, only seeing one returnee, I think it does kind of reflect on the reception of this season overall. As we said, coming off the back of Heroes vs. Villains, and not having these players play at the same level of caliber as we saw Russell play in Samoa, or even, you know, JT and Steven pivoting in Token Chains. It really was a different era, and, you know, as we said, it was the start of a dark age era of the show, so only seeing one returnee is a little bit of a reflection on that.
Yeah, you touched on Holly Hoffman a little bit there. I'd love to know your thoughts on the whole Holly versus Dawn debate. Who do you like better?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Holly. Certainly Dawn, I couldn't really stand on either of her seasons. Yeah. Holly Hoffman, she did have the same sort of attitude as Dawn early on in the game, but she really turned it around after swapping to Espada. She got in line with those younger members of the tribe and really used that momentum all the way to the final four. She's a great player. She really exhibited her strengths in challenges. Great socially. She turned her game around completely, which I really, really respect, that she had the fortitude to stick in the game, not quit, continue on fighting. And again, a lot of this comes back to Jimmy Johnson being the leader on the earlier Sparta tribe. But she ran with that momentum all the way to the final four. And had she got to final tribal council, I think she would have had a good shot at winning.
Yeah, 100% she does. And then, do you want to move on to the merge of the season?
Yeah, sure thing.
Yeah, okay. So we get to the merge here, and we get the Elena vote off, which kind of nothing for me. Then we get to the Marty vote off. This is where things start to get a little more interesting. Obviously, Marty gets finally screwed over by Sash and Brenda. And then after that, back to back, I want to touch on everything quickly, and then we'll kind of dissect what happens. Brenda gets blindsided, gets sent home. Nyanka and Kelly both quit the game of Survivor. And then the screws Sash over, loses his majority, loses his alliance, but he still somehow manages to, maneuver his way into a new alliance there. So really, there's a lot to talk about with this. This is the big part of the season for me.
Yeah, that's right. And certainly when we look at Brenda's influence on the game, really from day one, when she found the Medallion of Power and then finding the idol with Nyanka, she was controlling the vote basically all the way along, having that close alliance with Chase. And I think that's a big thing that reflected negatively on her, is having that close relationship with Chase really put a massive tug on her back. And other than Marty, she was the only one actively playing a strategic game. She was miles ahead of everyone else. And I think that really worked out against her because no one else was playing. So they saw her as being the blatant threat. And we did see Marty really starting to push against her, really starting to put the word out that, Brenda is the one that's running this game. We need to get rid of her. Otherwise, she'll just run the ship. And we are seeing, certainly Marty causing massive ripples in the game and, putting this resistance against Brenda.
Yeah, 100%. So then, this kind of like all happens all at once, and it gets really, really overwhelming when watching this over on a binge. But with the Marty going home, a sad moment. When you watch the Brenda vote off, it really kind of like the game takes a turn afterwards, really after, because that vote off really changes the entire game. I want to touch on the Nyanka and the purple Kelly quit. So they talk about it a little bit before, a few episodes before, like, oh, don't know if we can do this, stay in the game, not stay in the game. Nyanka, is it Nyanka or Kelly that ends up winning reward, or is it both of them and they choose to stay on the reward?
Yeah, so Nyanka wins reward and Kelly's on the opposite tribe. Nyanka wins reward and refuses to give up her reward for the others, which, again, a selfish move. Certainly, if you're going to be quitting the next day, you shouldn't be binging on candy. You should let the other tribe mates have that opportunity. It's a little bit of a selfish move on her part.
Yeah, so Nyanka, I think a terrible social game here on Survivor, but as a character and as a television personality, I actually really like her here. This kind of goes back to the whole thing of what the season of Survivor is all about. Just about like random weird moments, and having Nyanka here, she knows she's going to quit. Like, she ultimately knows this reward's not going to change things. She's going to quit the game no matter what. Chooses to take it anyway. She's being selfish. It's good. And then on the other things, we have Purple Kelly, the originator of the purple edit, where this thing gets known as. She gets a whole lot of nothing throughout the entire season of Survivor. And ultimately, with a few like behind the scenes things, you notice that she didn't get much clothes for the entire game. She was frozen out there, freezing the entire time. Not really fair on the producer's part to do this to her. So although I hate the idea of people quitting Survivor, I think that's always awful. During some instances, I think people can understand why it happens, especially for Purple Kelly's sake. And it's really not fair how she gets that overall purple edit, as we like to say.
Yeah, that's right. It is a little bit unfair. And we did get some great moments from her, such as the Milk Your Own Milk quote, or 20 years of wisdom at Tribal Council as well. But really, I'd say they're probably the only two moments we got from her. Throughout the season, we saw her rubbing up in Fabio's jacket because she had nothing else. And the conditions out there were pretty brutal. We saw time and time again them getting rained on. I'm really not enjoying it, which is why I think Nyanka and Purple Kelly decided to quit the game. Nyanka, I think, had she continued to play, she probably would have had the best chance to win at Tribal Council. Certainly her social game was lacking, but she was the dominating strategic force, even though she was a little bit clueless at times and certainly not as clued in as the likes of Brenda and Marty. But, had she been able to pivot and, pick out the right people, like maybe a Dan and a Jane, people that were despised by the rest of the jury, and, she'd really pulled off a couple of big moves, I think she would have had the best chance to win.
Yeah, 100%. So obviously this is kind of puts the whole negative tone back into the season, and why a lot of people, even though it was a rough start to the season as a whole, not much really to like about it. If you're going into a Survivor season with a strategic mindset and you really like those, big moves and strategy, and I love Survivor, having these 2 quits happen right here really hurts those people in that perspective. Do you have any points to kind of defend that against those people who say, oh, this season's awful and here's why?
Yeah, I certainly don't think you can pin it on the one vote, or on the one tribal council where 2 people quit. Again, as I said, it was a response to the conditions of the game. And, Purple Kelly was certainly really, really struggling. It does put a negative light on it, especially coming off the back of these 2 massive blindsides in Marty and Brenda. And I think the reason why people are so upset with it is because Nyanka's such a big character. And seeing her go out, especially after Marty and Brenda, 2 of the bigger characters, and even Alina was a big character as well. Yeah. Seeing those 4 go out back to back to back to back is a massive poor reflection on the season, because really we're left with, a couple of older people in Holly, Dan, and Jane, who I know Jane ended up getting the fan favorite award, but I don't think she was that well received by everyone. No. And even then, Benry, not really too popular. Chase and Sash rubbed a couple of people the wrong way, and Fabio, again, not really an active game player. So certainly seeing the biggest player in the game go out does really set the season back a little bit here.
Yeah, 100%. And then, we get the Benry blindside here. It ends up being Sash is kind of in the middle and figures his way through the game. Benry gets home and gets blindsided. The next vote is probably another interesting and top moment of the season for me. It's where you have, Fabio's going home. No matter what happens, Fabio's going home. And it's the classic case where someone's able to sneak their way near the end of the game and then goes on an immunity run and ends up winning it. So that's what Fabio ends up doing. We'll talk about his win a little bit later. But this is the moment where we get the Jane blow up, how these players are kind of not the most strategic, and they say, oh, Jane, it might be you, and then she blows up, which is really weird for me. I remember on my initial watch, early on in the season, I was like, oh, yeah, Jane's a pretty cool character. She's nice. She's friendly. I didn't catch many of the scary negative moments from her, but when she snaps here, it surprised me that she got the fan favorite award after the snap moment that happened.
Yeah, even then before that moment, I wasn't a big fan of Jane, and this really did solidify it. Obviously, we saw, Sash completely backstab her, and she goes out in basically a unanimous vote, with only her casting a sole vote towards Sash. And obviously the idol is played against Sash as well, so that vote is negated. But Jane is certainly, throughout the season, she shifted towards the younger members of the tribe, and she gained some sort of a standing and level of respect there with the likes of Brenda. But from there, she really didn't have too much standing in the game. Obviously, a lot of the season centered around her battle with Marty. Marty and Jane going head-to-head throughout the season, and Jane won that war, but in the end, I don't think she had the respect of anyone in the game, and certainly seeing her be betrayed and her sour reaction to it wasn't too good to see.
Yeah, exactly. So Jane ends up going home. Not a big fan of Jane. Not sure how she got that fan favorite award, like I said. And then we get Dan goes home here. Again, Dan wasn't a character that I was a fan of. There are some really fun characters to be had here. Just Jane and Dan back to back, not really it for me. Dan, I just seen he's so negative and whiny the whole time. Doesn't really want to be out there. He's got his bad knees. And then Holly, who, as you mentioned, is a great character. And the storyline there too is one of those storylines that Survivor loves to play through. You got the underdog, someone who's on the outs, low in the early parts of the game. And then obviously she gets that motivational speech she wants to keep going, and then makes this final four, which is amazing. And you could argue a spot where if she makes this final, she does really well.
I think she wins no matter what if she makes it to final tribal council. Her story in the game, her story arc is probably one of the best I've seen in Survivor. The fact that she was on the tribe early on, she got really frustrated, buried Dan's shoes in the river, which we haven't even mentioned yet. Such an iconic moment.
Yeah.
Dan's $1,600 alligator shoes, filling them with sand and throwing them in the river. And, you know, she was really at a bad mental state. And Jimmy Johnson convinced her to stay in the game, continue, because, you know, your kids would want you to continue in the game. And she took that advice and took it all the way to the final four, emerging as probably the biggest threat in the game. And, you know, had Fabio not won immunity, I'd say that she probably would end up at final tribal council, and Chase and Sash would be sitting there absolutely flabbergasted, because I wouldn't be surprised if Holly completely swept the jury.
Yeah, that would, when you put it like that, that makes a lot of sense. And it shows like that crazy story arc and the things that Survivor loves to show off. So because she's such a big threat, obviously she goes, and Fabio goes on an immunity run here to get to the very, very end of the game. Now, Fabio, you said you're a big Fabio fan and you love this guy. Tell me why.
Yeah, I love Fabio. He's such a great character. He's so goofy, but I think a lot of that is, while it is him, it's also a little bit of a facade. And if you watch the reunion, he does make some very smart comments about him sort of playing up the goofball character. Obviously, he is the blonde surfer dude, and that is who he's perceived as, but he really does play up his goofiness. A couple of times, though, he steps on, you know, crabs, he burns his socks, he does all these hilarious things. But I think when you look at it, it's obviously a very entertaining character. But if you watch his strategies and his confessionals, he is a very tactful character with how he's perceived. He does like to downplay his threat level and act as sort of that court jester sort of player. I mean, Fabio, his nickname after all, is named after the butter guy, this big blonde dumb man, and he plays into that role. He plays into everyone's perceptions, and people underestimate him for so long. He goes on this immunity streak towards the end, and he ends up winning against Chase and Sash.
Yeah, I think Fabio does exactly what Fabio needs to do to win a season of Survivor just like this, right? Like, he does everything he needs to do. He plays off that dumb character, the Fabio name, the nickname he gets. And I talk about this a lot in some of my other Survivor Retrospective videos, how perception is reality, obviously, on Survivor. If you can kind of push a narrative, then people will start to believe it. And I talk about this on a podcast with Spyro Spencer on David versus Goliath, how Nick coming up with the nicknames for those alliances. When you kind of start building a nickname, and with Mike White, he always comes up with nicknames for people, like calling one of the girls Wonder Woman, right? So whenever you do this, it kind of pushes that perception. Okay, this is who this person really is, even if you believe it or not. So even at the very start of the game, calling Fabio makes everyone think, oh, just a dumb, stupid surfer guy. He's out here. Yeah, he plays up to that perception the entire time. And I think I still don't think he's the smartest guy in the world, but able to do that, he's able to play up to the role and get to the end of the game. And he's a likable character compared to Chase and Sash, who rub people the wrong way throughout the season. And so he does the perfect thing to do during this season of Survivor, and it works.
Yeah, I'm not sure Fabio wins any other season than Nicaragua, but it really was the perfect storm for him to come on and, you know, play out that perception for the others, the rest of the cast being completely oblivious. But, you know, he certainly did do a great job at playing that role and under-leveling his threat level, making people look at him as though he's an idiot. And when you're working with a group like, you know, Purple Kelly, Kelly B, Dan, Jane, these people who aren't playing on a high level of gameplay, it certainly, you know, works in your favor to underplay that threat level, and them recognizing that he might not have played the best game in terms of voting for the right person at every tribal council. He certainly did a great job at recognizing how he's perceived within the tribe, and despite being the underdog, he managed towards the end there, as I said, to win those immunity challenges and use that momentum all the way to the end. And he did plead his case very well at tribal council as well.
Yeah, no, he does a good job all the way around. And the reason he gets a lot of heat from the community is just because, you know, he's not the smartest guy, doesn't play up to the strategy all that well, which So I can see that, but he goes on the immunity run at the end of the game, does an amazing job, and I think Fabio deserves more credit. He's a great character. Obviously, I would still have to say a bottom tier winner, but as a Survivor character, you got to up his stock. He's got to do way better. And then when I was doing some research for this season, I completely forgot about the Dane and Sash controversy with Mortgagegate. So if you guys are unaware, listening to this, Jane says that Sash had secretly offered to pay off Jane's mortgage if she helped him win. And obviously, according to the Survivor rules, you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, certainly negatively marred this season there. If everything else hadn't been negative before then. But yeah, a massive oversight on the season. Again, this is just Survivor conspiracy theories from what I understand. I'm not sure if it's 100% been confirmed over the years.
It's all hearsay.
But yeah, from what we've heard, Sash promised to pay off Jane's mortgage if she helped him to win. Obviously, as you say, a massive oversight, certainly not allowed in the rules of the game, working very much against the spirit of the game. But in the end, though, I think Sash negatively betrayed all the members of the jury, that he got so much heat in the end. And I don't think anyone respected him. I'd say he was probably the most active strategic player of the final three, but certainly the way he went about it and backstabbing all these people throughout the way, especially Jane and Brenda, it didn't work well for him.
Yeah, no. And that's kind of like the key, right? You got to backstab someone and make them like you in the end of the day, right? So Sash does not do a good job here. And like looking at the names on this list I have in front of me, he really does betray everyone and rubs every single person, most people in this jury, the wrong way. And then Chase is kind of like, Chase is not a good Survivor player. We can put it that way. I don't know if you listen to his music. He has some good country music out now, but as a Survivor player, Chase is not it.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, as you said there, Fabio, I would say he's an underrated winner, certainly not a top tier winner, probably deserving of his spot in between that 31 to 40 ranking. But I think people underplay his perception. The way he played the game, recognizing from day one that people were going to look at him as this dumb, blonde-haired surfer dude, and really running with that and, throughout the game, underplaying his threat level. I think it's not spoken highly enough of how good a game Fabio played, given the level of the cast and the season he was in. As I said before, it wouldn't work in any other season, maybe Gabon or something like that, but certainly for this season, Nicaragua really is a unicorn in this instance. The cast as a whole are playing at not the highest level of gameplay, particularly when compared to Heroes vs. Villains and Samoa. But Fabio as the winner of this season really reflects the season as a whole, I think. Just a crazy season all around. Lots of underdogs, lots of goofy moments, and in the end, it's capped off with the perfect goofy winner.
Fabio is a great character of Survivor, but there's so many other issues with the season that I just can't ignore. Like you have this, you coming off of Heroes versus Villains, and then you get right into this season. That's already not a good way to start, right? You have so many new Survivor fans probably coming back to the show from the old school era. You can, my Colby's coming back. Oh, Boston Rob. Oh, Sandra. Like all these old school players are coming back. And then you get right into this season, which is kind of like on a negative note. We start the dark ages of Survivor. You have a double quit that happens. You have a lot of questionable moments throughout the entire season. You have a lot of misses that Survivor tries to attempt but ends up missing altogether, like the Medallion of Power. And that's why, and because of, I like Gabon better than this season. Gabon is another weird season I do like, but it's because there's a lot of chaos and I think more fun to be had than this season, which I just think is more seen as a negative note. And that might just be more because of where I was at when I was watching this season of Survivor. I was so excited after the top Heroes versus Villains that because this comes right after Heroes and Villains, I just can't see it in a positive light. Anyways, that's all I got. Snuffed, thank you so much for coming here today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been great discussing Nicaragua with you.
Yeah, if you guys want to go check out Snuffed on YouTube, of course, he puts out great Survivor content. I'll put a link down his channel down in the description. Check him out. Subscribe to both our channels. And of course, like the video. Comment down below your thoughts on the season. What did we miss? Do you think this season deserves more love, more hate? Were we too nice on it? And obviously, what are your thoughts on Fabio as a winner? My final rating for Survivor Nicaragua is a 2.0 out of 10. F tier.